I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Join us on Facebook Live right now. If you're checking this out, we thank you for checking us out, and enjoy what we call robust conversations. Well, today's program is no exception. I'm pleased to have as a guest here in the studio at SPNN, Juan Hernandez. Juan Hernandez is a professor at Bethel College. His title is Professor of Biblical Studies, Biblical and Theological Studies Department at the College of Arts and Sciences. Juan Hernandez, Dr. Hernandez, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well.
And so you've got a project going on right now or
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow. It's something that's got about 3 years of experience. It's a seminar for Spanish-speaking
Mm-hmm.
pastors and leaders on the Book of Revelation.
That's right.
Sounds
That's
exciting.
Right. Yeah,
Tell me about it, and tell our audiences about it.
So essentially what we have is a seminar. It's going to be 3.5 hours on the Book of Revelation, and it's largely a Spanish-speaking audience. Mm-hmm. About 3 years ago, I was invited to help out some pastors with some studies. We had a special speaker come to Bethel, and they realized there was a need for some sort of connection with the Spanish-speaking community. And they asked, would you be interested in doing that? And I'm bilingual and bicultural, and I thought, well, sure, why not? You know, and I had been at Bethel already 10 years, and I had never done anything like this.
Doing what at Bethel for 10 years?
Oh, Professor of Biblical and Theological Studies, so I teach Greek, Introduction to the Bible, and so forth. But never had done anything with the pastors, especially not in Spanish, although I had done that before coming here.
Sure.
So we said, sure, let's go ahead and do it. And they had planned for a group of about 30 pastors. Well, as the day approached, 30 went to 60 to 90, and we ended up with 140 pastors and leaders from the Twin Cities area who were interested in coming to learn. And at that time, I was teaching on Paul's letters. And the idea was just to offer them something. It ended up taking a life of its own. The people wanted more. So for the last 3 years, we have been running these seminars 2 to 3 times a year on a Saturday, 3.5 to 4 hours. We also have lunch and fellowship on various books of the Bible. So we did Paul's letters, we did all of the Gospels, which took us, a 1.5 years. And of course, Revelation is a hot topic of interest, so we've announced Revelation. And the approach largely is one of just kind of what's the history, what's the culture, the language. It's designed to give people kind of a grounding in the material, and they can do what they want with it. But it's all in Spanish, but the PowerPoints are in English, and we have plenty of bilingual people there. So it's a good time.
The interest is obviously great because people are many more than you expected to show.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And so what does that tell you? What does it mean in terms of ordinary? These are leaders and pastors showing up. But what does it tell you in terms of the either sensibility or the attitude or the appetite of common, ordinary parishioners of men and women? Where are we in the arena, the question of faith and religion?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'd have to say it's been very organic. That's the first thing. So it's not as if I struck out and said, I'm going to do this. It was already out there. And what we have are just a burgeoning population of church-oriented families who love God, love the Bible, and I suspect they've grown a little tired of kind of the traditional kind of teaching, because I'll be honest with you, what I do in these seminars, I take what I teach in the college and I just translate it into Spanish. I don't dumb it down. I offer challenging material. One of the things that I tell them is there are 2 things that I want from you. I want you to be inspired, but I also want you to be made just a little uncomfortable. Where you ask questions, where you look for yourself. So I'm really interested in the life of the mind, getting them to kind of broaden their horizons and think about the Bible differently. And interestingly, what started to happen because of that, not only do we have a bunch of people coming every time, they've started to send their students, their sons and daughters to Bethel. And that was unexpected because I don't promote Bethel. I simply do my song and dance. I just work there. I just teach there. I don't, so we're very grateful, and I think the population is maybe maturing. And I'll throw in this one last bit. It's particularly satisfying in terms of activism because it gives visibility to a population that in this toxic political environment has been maligned and caricatured. So we're saying, no, you know what, these are good people, well-intentioned, they want to learn, they want to come to Bethel to see this and learn. And also it gives the host culture, which is a largely Anglo culture, an opportunity to see and meet. And so it's a lot of things, and yeah.
Where does the tension between host culture and Latino culture exist in understanding, learning the Bible, the teachings of the Bible?
Yeah.
Where are there points of both confluence or congruence, but also points of contention?
Sure.
Where interest and analyses collide? Where maybe not analysis, but where interests collide.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, the culture, at least at Bethel, is fairly conservative, and it's largely an Anglo culture. This group of individuals who come, they're also fairly traditional, fairly conservative. The difference is that the host culture is in power. The other culture is disempowered, right? The host culture can easily move along ideological lines. The guest culture is not so much interested in ideology. They are interested in, job, feeding a family, food, certainly not being deported, education, good school, safety for their kids. So the concerns are very different.
And dignity. Of being recognized as human beings.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that we do when we have these conferences as well, we make sure that some official from Bethel comes and greets them and welcomes them, because dignity is probably the greatest gift you can offer, and it's not just we mean it. As a matter of fact, speaking of dignity, I'll throw in just one last detail. One of the things that we are proposing is offering a Greek class in Spanish. Right, so you got New Testament Greek. Students can take it at Bethel. Well, this particular group, of course, largely Spanish speaking, is interested in taking Greek. Well, we've put a proposal together, and what we're going to possibly be doing very soon is offering it for credit at Bethel. So these individuals will not just get some sort of certificate, they will get Bethel credit if they take this class, and of course pass it. So for me, that is activism, that is offering dignity, and I personally am not very dogmatic about the scripture, so you take and do what you want with it, but I want you to be inspired and affirmed and thrive.
How did you come to this arena of study, Juan Hernandez? What brought you to the scholarship and the commitment to examining the Bible? Yeah.
So I think, a lot of these stories are about a conversion. So I had a conversion experience when I was 15. I went into a Pentecostal church. Pentecostal churches are not usually known for being very academic. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of passion. It's all good. Ironically, that is where I started to become interested in the life of the mind. Like the Bible started to be interesting. And I started to read voraciously. I started to memorize loads of scripture. And really one thing kind of led to the other, and I ended up going to college. And what happened was that the memory that I had used for learning languages, or learning the Bible, I could apply to languages. And I found that Greek classes and Hebrew classes and Aramaic classes came rather easy, and that was empowering. And so I ended up just kind of, it was also very organic, very gradual, but college led to seminary led to PhD program, Emory University. And I just found the life of the mind was nurtured through my interaction with the scriptures, but then it expanded and broadened beyond that. It was very empowering because, frankly, there weren't many Latinos who were involved in biblical studies at that level. So that was kind of the journey, and it's actually how I ended up at Bethel as well. One of the professors at Bethel was actually an outside reader for my dissertation at Emory University, and when a job opened up, he told me about it, and I ended up here.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest, Juan Hernandez. Juan Hernandez teaches, Dr. Juan Hernandez teaches biblical studies at the College of Arts and Sciences at Bethel College. His specialty is the Book of Revelations. So when you are presenting analysis, ways to embrace, understand, and know the content of Revelations. What's driving you, and what are people taking from the discussion, the teaching that you're presenting?
Okay. Yeah, I think largely I focus mostly on what I'm curious about, what interests me. Because if I stick to what interests me and what I'm curious about, I can convey passion, right? So there are many discussions about the book. People focus on tribulation, the rapture, millennium, all that kind of stuff, and that's well and good. I'm far more interested in its words. I'm far more interested in its language.
For example, tell me about that. Let's explore.
Okay, so in terms of my own scholarship, for example, my PhD was on the book of Revelation. Rather than ask questions about what does this mean for the future, I actually asked questions about the past. So I looked at a few manuscripts from the 4th and 5th century. And these are Greek manuscripts that have been preserved. And I looked at them and asked, how do they differ from the text we now have, right? And it is in those differences that you can kind of track scribal copying habits. They're copying them. What's being left out? What's being put in? Why is that the case? What does that tell us about their culture? So in essence, I'm actually interested in how did the 4th century reader look at Revelation? How did the 5th century reader look at Revelation? Then later, how do the scholars kind of put that whole story together? And what you get are insights about ourselves as interpreters. So I'll give you a quick example. There is a verse in Revelation where it says, you know, Jesus says, I'm the beginning of the creation of God, right? And he's telling one of the churches this. Well, in this one's 4th century manuscript, the word creation is changed to church. I'm the beginning of the church of God. It's a different word entirely, different vowels and consonants in Greek, so it wasn't a mistake. It's 4th century. So what's going on
interpretation.
here? It's interpretation, that's right. And in this particular case, in the manuscript, if you have Jesus saying, I'm the beginning of the creation of God, that may smack of him saying, I am a creation. And of course, there were all kinds of debates in the 4th century about whether Jesus was God or created. Well, someone obviously changed it to the beginning of the church of God and sidestepped that contentious issue. So it's not unlike when you have a speaker or a pastor say, well, here's what the scripture says, and but I'll tell you what it really means, except that it's written in the text. That's fascinating to me. And although that is not what we call an original reading, you know, it nonetheless informs us about ourselves. So ultimately, I'm interested in ourselves as human interpreters.
Dr. Hernandez, excuse me, when you were 5 years old, when you were 7, what was the future like for you then? What was the intent that you were forming in your mind of who you would become?
I remember that I was fascinated with complexity. I was fascinated with things that people generally ignored. One of the things that I would do is essentially I was told not to do something. I felt like I should do it.
That's the thing to do.
Yeah, it's a thing to do. And I also loved cityscapes, you know, complex cityscapes. So I remember 5 or 6 laying out some loose leaf paper on the kitchen floor and making little buildings with papers. And I love the idea of big buildings and small buildings and a trolley running through, but also cars in different streets. Like that whole detail was just fascinating to me for the sheer delight of turning a corner and seeing something new. It may sound like it has nothing to do with my scholarship, but in fact, the questions I have chosen to focus on are questions that are not, or generally have not been tackled. As a matter of fact, when I started my own work, I was told by scholars, you shouldn't go into that area, or everything's been answered, and that kind of thing. And every time that has been wrong. So yeah, 5 years old, extreme interest in detail.
What did your parents hope for you?
You know, I think obviously, you know, we grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and it's a very difficult city. It's a ghetto, essentially. We had a good home. I think, obviously, safety. But my parents were very affirming of my creativity. I did a lot of art as well, along with this. So they would talk about, oh, you could become an artist. So they essentially nurtured whatever kind of thing I was interested in. But you know, it wasn't a serious talk. You must be this when you grow up. I think happy and healthy and whole would have been good enough.
And so to go from there to discover a passion for Greek literature, Greek language,
yeah.
Hebrew language, other languages, and a particular and specific focus on the Bible and on Revelations must have been rewarding for you and for them and everybody around you, I'm presuming.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. First of all, again, if you are growing up in a ghetto and you see the path of many of your friends, they were thrilled that I was interested in church stuff, right? The Bible was great, right? And my dad confessed to me some years later, he said, you know, I never told you this, but when I was young, I was at church in a mass, and I saw the priest, and for a moment I felt I could be a priest. And he said, so I see that kind of fulfilled in you, which is interesting. I'm not a priest, but there's that. So yeah, it's been affirmed. I also realized that no matter how different it might seem from what they are and what they did, it's not all that different. I'll give you one quick example. My mom loves crossword puzzles, right? And you know, there are times I look at her and I'm like, you know, why are you doing crossword puzzles? I just thought that was just, you know, not very academic. But I'm looking at her, and what do I see her doing? Looking for detail, right? And getting satisfaction out of finding detail. You could swap that out for a Greek manuscript where all the letters are together, just like a crossword, and you're also kind of detecting, you know, where are the patterns? What are the words that are here? It's the same. So the rhythms, no matter, my upbringing was very different from theirs. They grew up in Puerto Rico. I grew up in the U.S. My mom didn't go beyond high school. I went well beyond, but the patterns of my existence are not too different from theirs.
I'm so fascinated, so pleased to meet you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My pleasure to speak with Professor Juan Hernandez, and he's presenting a special conversation, a seminar tomorrow at Bethel. It's a seminar for Spanish-speaking pastors and leaders on the book of Revelations. I want to bring you back. What you've done is whet my appetite to have a deeper conversation about how the Bible and how theology impacts our lives as individuals, personal conversions, but also as communities and as cultures. And I started with the one question about where is the conflict, the line of engagement between our cultural realities and how much of that is artificial and how much of it is real. So that's a conversation I want to have with you at a point down the road, but thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.
All right, I'm Al McFarlane. Join us again next time for Conversations with Al McFarlane.